The difference between a Christian and a Baha'i, therefore, is this. There was a former springtime, and there is a springtime now. No other difference exists because the foundations are the same. Whoever acts completely in accordance with the teachings of Christ is a Baha'i. The purpose is the essential meaning of Christian, not the mere word. The purpose is the sun itself and not its dawning points. For though the sun is one sun, its dawning points are many. We must not adore the dawning points, but worship the sun. We must adore the reality of religion and not blindly cling to the appellation Christianity. The sun of reality must be worshipped and followed. We must seek the fragrance of the rose from whatever bush it is blooming, whether Oriental or Western. Be seekers of light, no matter from which lantern it shines forth. Be not lovers of the lantern. Abdul Baha. So now I'll introduce our speaker for today, and just a reminder to save all your questions until after the talk when we have time for questions and answers. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat. So our speaker this week is Dr. Vahid Ranjbar, and his topic is Early Christianity and the Baha'i Faith. Vahid Ranjbar is a tenured physicist working at Brookhaven National Lab. His field of research is spin and beam dynamics, for which he has published extensively, and is a reviewer for the American Physical Society's Physical Review journals. He is currently leading the development of the electron injector complex for the future Electron Ion Collider. He grew up living in Tanzania, India, Pakistan, and in the US, and spent 3 years studying physics in Novosibirsk, Russia. He is an occasional contributor to the BahaiTeachings.com magazine, writing on subjects related to science and religion. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Ranjbar.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this to talk to you folks. If you give me a second, I'll go ahead and share some slides that I have prepared for this talk. There we go. So the topic of my discussion today is going to be really comparing a lot of interesting parallels between early Christianity and the Baha'i Faith. So these parallels, I think, mark not just the historical context in which they both were born, but they also extend into really some interesting parallels theologically in how they deal with the problem of God and the absolute, and how he relates to humanity. In fact, I think the parallels were so much so that many of the early Western observers who kind of commented and wrote about the birth of the Baha'i Faith in Persia commented on this and kind of noted the similarities, and that was one of the reasons many of them were drawn to write about it and make plays and other things about it. And later, the Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i Faith, he was the one who headed the Baha'i Faith from basically the 20s to about the mid-50s. He also, in his discussions of the history of the Baha'i Faith, drew a lot of parallels to the growth of Christianity, and so I think that's kind of, you can see a lot of parallels between the growth of Christianity in the Roman Empire, and also how the Baha'i Faith kind of has grown within Western society. So for those of you who are not maybe that familiar, I'm going to kind of go through some of this, and so you get a little bit of a background and idea of what the Baha'i Faith is and how it was kind of came to be. So Baha'i Faith was born in 1844 in what is modern day Iran, then known as Persia, and it was centered around this initially on this individual who assumed the title of the Bab, which means the gate, and he claimed to be basically the promised one for the Muslim and Shiite religion. They had been waiting for kind of messianic figure who was going to bring justice to the world, which off the bat is also very, very similar to the kind of expectation that existed surrounding the birth of Jesus Christ and by the Jews, and the expectation of the Messiah who was going to come and conquer and restore Israel, and there was a lot of that expectation. So off the bat, you have this really great parallel in those two situations. You had this very established, very monotheistic culture and religion into which both Christianity and the Baha'i Faith was kind of born into. And there around it, there are these expectations that this conqueror is going to come and he's going to wage war and restore righteousness and kind of establish their religion. And right off the bat, they disappointed those expectations on some level. So, for example, with Christianity, you see with Jesus, that part of the problem that they had was that he did not go and advocate violence and trying to overthrow and establish a physical kingdom. He said his kingdom is not of the earth, and said that this would happen in the future. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. As you know from the Lord's Prayer. And as similarly, the Bab also, although there was initially some military conflicts which occurred, which were defensive in nature, still he did not engage in an offensive attack and did not try to spread and establish his authority through violence. And later, when Baha'u'llah came to the scene, this was totally abolished and it became completely passive. And again, this idea that we're not going to establish, so this ran counter to the expectations of many of the Muslims, the Shiite Muslims, who were kind of would have waiting a steed for this promised one who was going to come with his sword and just conquer, and there'd be so much blood, and there's all these apocryphal stories that they carry, and they still do, kind of think that this is going to happen. But what actually happened with the Bab is he basically taught that he was himself preparing the way for someone even greater than him. He was another great parallel to Christianity. He basically saw himself as very similar to how John the Baptist was. So, before Christianity, you had John the Baptist coming, who said that he was preaching and preparing the way for the coming of the Messiah. And so this in the same manner, the Bab basically made very clear that he was, although he had his own laws, and this differentiates him from John the Baptist, where he actually claimed to be an independent prophet and manifestation of God. He also said that he was preparing the way for someone who was going to come very shortly, who would bring this ultimate justice and peace in the world. So during his brief lifetime, he basically declared announced his mission when he was around 25 years old. He was an obscure merchant in Shiraz, and not of the clerical establishment. So that right off the bat was kind of strange for the people at the time, though he was descendant of the house of the Prophet Muhammad. So he managed, though in a very brief time, to gather many disciples around them, many eminent scholars in the mullahs of the Islamic and Shiite faith, and including one very famous woman by the name of Taharet. And you can kind of see some depiction of him. Again, this was a drawing that was done back in 1892 by this Edward Ziegler. So this kind of shows you they were also very, just fascinated by these events that were going on in Persia at the time, that the woman would, she published one of the great things that she did as a disciple. She publicly, one of the first times, removed the whole veil in public and announced that this was the day now when the women should be equal with men. And so she was one of the leading disciples of the Bab. There were many others. There was in total 18 letters of the living that they were so called, and they all like the disciples of Christ all met eventually were martyred and killed because of the natural backlash that was engendered in the clerical establishment in various ways. So you can see. Yeah, this is the exterior of the house of the Bab, where he declared his mission for the first time. This is one of the mosques that the Bab actually went publicly in the pulpit and preached. Again, these are kind of reminiscent of like Jesus going to Jerusalem to preach, and there's a lot of parallels to it. And there are also parallels again around his eventual martyrdom in 1850, where in the case of the Bab, he was eventually in Tabriz after being imprisoned for many times. The authorities finally decided, well, they need to execute him. They gathered him in this barrack square in Tabriz, and at first, they tied him up with this rope, and suspended him by this rope with one of his young disciples who begged to die with him, tied to him, and they ordered this regiment. Sam Khan was an Armenian Christian. He had sold 250 soldiers, lined them up, and tried to execute him. Now, prior to this, his execution, he had been in his cell, basically dictating his last kind of words to his secretary, and the guards kind of interrupted him and took him away against his objections. But he basically kind of admonished them and said, until I have finished writing what I need to complete, there's no earthly power that can prevent this from happening. But they ignored him. They tied him up. They brought him into the barracks and prepared to execute him. And the commander, Sam Khan, had himself, expressed reservations about executing him to the Bab himself, and said, I'm a Christian. I don't have any ill will to you. I don't want to really do this. And the Bab said, don't you worry. You do as you're commanded, and God will solve your problems. And so they fired, and back in those days, these were these muskets, and there was lots of smoke was released, and so you can imagine 250 of these rifles being volleyed off one after another. All this smoke filled the air, and then after the smoke had cleared, the Bab was gone, and his disciples kind of standing bewildered where he had gone to, and they looked. What happened? They said, "Oh, he went up to heaven." People were kind of getting excited, and they looked for him and found him back in his cell, finishing his dictation to his secretary. And at the end, he said, "Okay, now you can take me and fulfill your intentions." So Sam Khan immediately quit and said, "I want nothing more to do with this." And he finally. They had to bring another regiment in to complete the deed, and this time they succeeded in executing him. So those were the kind of dramatic stories around his execution, which on some level are very reminiscent of the stories around the Passion of the Christ and how he was martyred. And there's also the story that after he was killed, there was a storm took over, and the sky blackened, and there's all these again and what's interesting about these stories is these are not just Baha'i accounts. There's actually Western diplomatic accounts of these events. So it's you have more corroboration of them. So these stories reach, the West, and so you had figures like Edward Granville Brown, who actually went to Persia, learned Persian, and circulated among the Babis, as they were called at the time, learned much about the religion, and wrote about it extensively. Even before him, you had Lord Curzon, again, another British diplomat kind of who was there. He wrote a book on the Persians and spoke glowingly about Tahira and her life. In Russia, there was a play that was put on about the Bab in 1904, and by Isabella Grinskaya. And it was really, I think, through this that Tolstoy actually learned about it, and also later on in his life developed a communication with Abdul Baha. And so these are just a few of the characters that really took notice of it. This similarity, though, of the Baha'i faith and Christianity goes even beyond just like the circumstances of the history. They also both, I think, had this very interesting and complex relationship with the strict monotheism into which they were both born into. So in the case of Christianity, you had the really absolute monotheism that is professed in Judaism, where there's God and then there's man, and that's it. You have prophets, fine, but they're still human. And also in Islam, which kind of assumed a very similar type of track. However, both with the Bab and then later with Baha'u'llah, if you read some of their writings, even the Bab especially, there are some passages where he, talks about being God, and he really plays, which must have really troubled them to no end. He plays with this concept that of the deity, and in a way which was very troubling. So, for example, in Christianity, one of the things that the rabbis did not like is that it seemed to be that he was making claims to have the authority, which was really only reserved for God. I mean, that's part of the reason that's given why he was crucified. And again, similarly with the Bab and Baha'u'llah, that they really one of the, even to this day, the criticisms that are leveled against Baha'is is that, oh well, they believe that Baha'u'llah was God, which is not true, but it misunderstands this idea. And both really, I think, in order to resolve this conflict, because this existed in Christianity, the lucky thing about the Baha'i faith is that this conflict was very clearly resolved and explained in the writings directly of both Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. So this was not ever a big issue. However, in Christianity, in absence of that, they developed this concept of logos, which evolved later on into a Trinitarian theology. And I argue, my personal opinion is that if you look at the original solution offered by the early church fathers, this is actually fairly indistinguishable from the solution expressed by Abdul Baha, and is really at the heart of this new philosophy that also emerged around the time that Christianity was now coming on the stage in the Roman Empire, of Neoplatonism, who's the founder is considered this person by the name of Plotinus. I'll get into him a little bit more here. So really the problem in Christianity was really, who was Christ? Was he God, or was he just a man? Really this if you look at the statements of Christ, he seems to be both claiming divinity reserved for God at some points, and at other times he appears to be rejecting it, claiming a station as a mere human or a clearly subordinate to the Father. He says such statements as, I and the Father are one. I can do nothing except when I see the Father do it. Why do you worship me? And then there, of course, is titled the Son of God. So this was a problem for the early Christians. And one of the solutions to this, I think, really involved the use of this Neoplatonic idea of logos to help resolve this contradiction. It really builds off. There's a very interesting philosopher, a Jewish philosopher that existed. He was actually contemporary with Jesus. His name was Philo of Alexandria. There's no indication that he was aware of Christianity or what was going on, since this is not recorded in history. But it's his ideas were definitely influential in the early Christians. And in fact, a lot of his writings were preserved precisely because some of the early Christians were confused and actually thought he was a Christian because it was so close to the Christian theology. For example, he developed this understanding of how the firstborn of God. First, he was very much himself steeped in the Greek philosophy and Platonism. And so he drew on this idea of logos, this idea of the word, the first mind of God, and linked that to the idea of the firstborn of God, and linked it back to the Old Testament. And so it's very stunning how it really, on many levels, prefigures what you now later read, which 40 years later, now you have the writing of the Gospel of John, where it talks about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, that whole famous first chapter, which really is kind of maybe considered the foundation of this logos idea in Christianity. Now, if you go outside of the New Testament, the first mention of logos is where he says that there is one God who is manifest himself by Jesus Christ, his Son, who is the eternal Word, not proceeding forth from silence. And this is from John's disciple, Ignatius. So the idea, let me just get into this, but I think it's actually explained very well in Baha'u'llah's treatment of this issue. And Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith, who came now after the Bab, like I said, the Bab had predicted that someone was going to come who was going to be greater than him and bring about kind of the justice in the world. And so one of his followers, of early followers of the Bab, was a nobleman by the name of Mirza Hussein Ali. And he later on took on the title of Baha'u'llah, which was affirmed by the Bab. A lot of the early disciples and followers of the Bab, they were kind of given names or titles. And actually Baha'u'llah, the Mirza Hussein Ali at the time, had created these titles. So Baha'u'llah actually gave the name to some of the other disciples, including himself, and the Bab affirmed it. So he later on, after the execution of the Bab and after he was exiled to Baghdad in 1863, publicly then claimed to be this promised one of the Bab. And the vast majority of the Babis accepted his claim, and it became kind of that's when you kind of start being called, instead of Babis, being called Baha'is. And eventually he was exiled and ended up in modern day Israel, in Haifa and in Akko. And that's where he eventually was buried as a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire. And that's why the Baha'i World Center is there. But in his book of Certitude, this is one of his principal theological works, Baha'u'llah describes how the prophets of God are similar to mirrors, which reflect the image and glory of God in the finite vessel of the human body. So in other writings, Baha'u'llah elaborates on the utter transcendence of God. So he talks about God in his essence. So he basically kind of develops this negative theology, which rejects any attempt at conceptualizing or describing the deity. So basically, there's this understanding that there is God in his essence, which is beyond conception, beyond understanding, beyond description, and there's no access. He says, oh, he is sanctified above all attributes and holy above all names. So anything you even say about it is immediately out the door wrong. But then there's God as he is manifest and represented, and most perfectly represented in the image of what we call the manifestations of God. And so these are individuals like Jesus, like Muhammad, like Krishna, Buddha. So these individuals now are mirrors, perfect mirrors of the image of God. And even more so, there's this idea that they're kind of levels of existence. So the first level of existence is God in his essence. The second level of existence is what we call the primal will, the first emanation of the essence of God. And this is what we call logos, and the primal will, the first word of God. This is what is termed. And that logos is really what is actually responsible for the creation of the universe, creation of man, and what gets manifested in the individual personality, in the person of the prophets of God and his holy messengers. So they're pre-existent. So we're taught that these manifestations of God are not just ordinary human beings. They have a pre-existent aspect of them, that is the logos. And then there's the human reality, and what connects all of these three levels is the Holy Spirit. And that's kind of represented here. I showed you you probably saw this in the first thing. This is the so-called ringstone symbol. So the Baha'is use this often to kind of represent this. So this is the level of the manifestation, level of the deity, the God in his absolute, the manifestation or logos, and then the human reality and the spirit, Holy Spirit that connects them. So this is kind of the explanation of what the meaning of this symbol is. And it represents really this what you can kind of understand is really, I think, the Neoplatonic idea, which was actually much more older than this. So to explain it another way, let me quote from Abdu'l-Baha on some answer questions. He explains, now if we were to say that we have beheld the sun in two mirrors, one Christ, the other Holy Spirit, or in the other words, we have seen three suns, one in heaven and two upon earth, we would be speaking the truth. And if we were to say that there is only one sun, that it is absolute singleness, and that it has no peer or partner, we would again be speaking the truth. The purport of our words is that the reality of Christ was a clear mirror wherein the Sun of Truth, that is, the divine essence, appeared and shone forth with the infinite perfections and attributes. It is not that the Sun, which is the essence of divinity, was ever divided or multiplied, for it remained one, but it became manifest in the mirror. Thus, it is evident and established that the essence of divinity is absolute oneness and has no peer, equal, or likeness. So, like I was saying, really, I think early on in Christianity, this idea of logos became really the vehicle with which they could resolve the tensions in this understanding of who Christ was. And so you have the early church fathers really drawing on this. So, for example, you have Justin the Martyr, one of the earliest, Clement of Alexandria, and then, of course, the famous Origen of Alexandria, and probably the most controversial. Later on, a few of these, like Origen in particular, was denounced as a heretic by centuries later by the church, because it just contradicted what they were now preaching later. as well, Clement of Alexandria. They didn't quite denounce them, but they were disturbed by the implications of what he was saying, since it contradicted their Trinitarian ideas that they developed later. And all of these folks really actively, like Philo, tried to reconcile Platonic philosophy with Christian theology. And they developed and used this concept of logos as this kind of bridge between the absolute and the temporal. And this is actually an old philosophical question that even predates Christianity. In Platonism, how do you relate these absolute forms to the reality of the world? And so there was a problem there that existed at the birth of Platonism, and kind of continued. And it really is this idea of Neoplatonism, was that now you can bridge this by using this concept of logos that kind of connects these two realms of being. Moving on here. So there's another interesting connection, I think, between Christianity and the Baha'i faith, and that is the focus on education. One of the first things that the Christian community did in Alexandria was set up this catechismal school in Alexandria. Now, this is a very interesting institution. It was purportedly founded by St. Mark the Apostle. This school became an important center of learning, not only for Christian theological matters, but also in science, mathematics, Greek and Roman literature, logic, and the arts. This school had Clement, as was of Alexandria, I mentioned earlier, as the dean. Origen was also one of the headed it up later, and there were many other Christian scholars taught there. I think similarly, you had this really, if you know anything about the Baha'i history, there was tremendous focus on education. One of the, especially kind of a broad education. The Tarbiyat school in Iran was one of the first, really the first girls' school in Iran at the time, and it became not just, I mean, it educated girls, it also educated boys, but the first time we had a school educating girls. And it became so well regarded that actually the Shah, the king's son, attended that school for a time, until it was shut down by the clerical establishment. This is all under you have to understand, they were trying to build these schools and these institutions under the tremendous pressure of the Shiite clerical establishment, which just wanted this all shut down, which saw them as this terrible heresy. So it was challenging. And so it was later, it was dissolved and closed down. And if you know anything about the contemporary history, which you talk to any Persian Baha'i friends, you'll learn about, it's still ongoing, this type of persecution, especially since the Iranian Revolution in '79. I also, getting back to the theological matters and philosophy, I think it's also very interesting that many people basically see that Neoplatonism is kind of separate from Christianity, and I would argue that actually Neoplatonism, is often accredited to this individual named Plotinus, who he was not a Christian, but he was a deist in the sense that he believed that there was a God, though he comes out of the pagan tradition. And he is often credited with formulating Neoplatonic ideas years later. However, Plotinus himself credits his teacher Ammonius Saxus. Now, Ammonius is a very interesting and enigmatic figure, because he himself, Ammonius, did not write, did not have any extant literature that he wrote. And Plotinus attributes all of his ideas to Ammonius Saxus. And interestingly, Ammonius, though, was, according to Porphyry, this is one of the disciples of Plotinus, who was a kind of from not a Christian and antagonistic towards Christian. He says that Ammonius actually was raised as a Christian. And now he claims he later rejected Christianity, but this is contradicted by later church fathers, and who say no, he was still a Christian. And so, for me, I think it's very interesting that Ammonius was living in Alexandria, in where the catechismal school was functioning. So it's really difficult to imagine that someone of who was raised a Christian, who was a scholar, would have no connection to this catechismal school. I think he must have. So indeed, it's hard to doubt the influence of Christianity would have had on Neoplatonism, nor the embrace of Platonism, which early Christian thinkers held. And there's another actually interesting thing about Ammonius Saxus, which is fascinating, is that there's some speculation that, given his name, Saxus, that actually there is an argument that the etymology of that might be actually go all the way back to Hindu roots, and that he may have had an Indian background, and which I think it kind of fits, because if you know the story of Plotinus himself was very fascinated by the Eastern philosophy, and in fact embarked on this ill-fated adventure to join the Roman army when it went to Persia, because he wanted to go to Persia to learn philosophy from the Persians. And I think he got this idea in his head from Ammonius Saxus that he needed to go there to learn philosophy. Now that was ill-fated. They were defeated, and he was kind of stuck in the middle of the Middle East without a way home, and he finally made his way back. But that's interesting. Additionally, Ammonius Saxus was also, again, another, he had to have been connected to the Catechismal Academy. He was also the teacher of none other than Origen. So again, really interesting. I really think that actually the birthright, the philosophical birthright of Christianity is Neoplatonism. And that Neoplatonism was later picked up in Islam by many Islamic philosophers. I don't go into that, but there's a connection there. And then I think what then happened is that you had later on a kind of these ideas of Logos Christianity were, frankly, in my opinion, misunderstood and developed. They kind of ironically developed into what became known, what contemporary we call the Trinitarian theology, which is now ascendant. This developed many years later, and actually the first mention of even the idea of the Trinity goes back to the writings of Theophilus of Antioch during the late 2nd century. When he was expounding on the first 3 days of creation, he defined the Trinity as God, his word Logos, and his wisdom Sophia. And this was kind of following the practice of identifying the Holy Spirit as the wisdom of God. By the early, now you move fast forward to the early 3rd century, it was now the Father Tertullian composed an apologetical work on the concept of the Trinity, though again he noted that the majority of believers in this day did not believe this. They were not accepting this idea of the Trinity. So despite his education in classical Greek traditions, he viewed the integration of Greek philosophy into theology as problematic, and he's famously the one who said, "What has Athens to do with Jerusalem?" While he was critical of Greek influence, it's interesting because his theology was informed by the Greek classic traditions. And he himself explicitly defined the Trinity as the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. defending this version of Christology against the theologian Praxis, whom he claimed was a monarchan. This was an early Christian theological view that argued that there's utter unity of the deity. And so Tertullian's concept of the Trinity, though, was still very different from what later on became established dogma. And Tertullian maintained this subordinationist view of the Son relative to the Father. And basically, he actually reserved the term God for the Father. He, however, borrowed from the Stoics, as he believed that all real things are material. So he kind of materialized everything. This is the idea of the Stoics. And so, although God is a spirit, this spirit was sort of a finer type of material. And so the Son, in his thinking, the Son was brought into existence using a portion of this spiritual matter, which through creation is brought into being. Thus, in Tertullian's view, the Son is not divine in the same way that the Father is, but he shares the same substance as the Father. So this perspective, I think, in my opinion, marks the genesis of this concept of homeostasis, which is central later to Trinitarian theology, that they're made of the same substance. So this is kind of it's weird because they now also are physicalizing these really abstract ideas that existed earlier, in my opinion. And now you go to the 4th century, all of a sudden this all breaks down. There's argumentation of the station of the nature of Christ, culminating in the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. And now this is what really solidified. And this is also coincides, as you may know, with the political ascendancy of Christianity with Constantine and whatnot. And and they were trying to also fight the heresy, so-called Arianism, which also held to a subordinationist view of Christ relative to the Father. And despite this tension, disputes, and violence concerning the exact formula of Trinitarian doctrine persisted. And there were several more of these ecumenical councils. And in the end, it really also, I think, played a big role in the split between the Western and Eastern churches. And interesting, another thing which kind of happened was you have around this time, again, the collapse of the catechismal school, which I think was kind of signaled so I always feel like they kind of misunderstood what was understood by the early church fathers in their view. And this then led to later physicalization of these abstract ideas. And if you go back and you look at how they're describing the relationship of the deity with the messenger of God, or in this case, Christ, it's really, again, I think it fits very well with exactly what Abdu'l-Baha was describing. And in fact, if you go to the letters of Paul, he even describes Christ as the image of God, again, harkening back to this allegory of the mirror that Abdu'l-Baha uses again and again in Baha'u'llah. So that is the end of my talk. I will stop sharing. And yes, open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ranjbar, for that talk. I really didn't know before about those similarities about, Christianity emerging from Judaism and Bahá'í Faith emerging from Islam and their view of, the prophet as divine. I thought that was really interesting. So we have time for questions. So if anyone has a question, you can put it in the chat and I will read it out. We have one question already that asks, can you explain the significance of early Christian martyrs and how this resonates with the Baha'i concept of sacrifice and service?
Oh, I didn't even talk about that. That's another big correspondence. Well, I mentioned it briefly, but I didn't go into it with it. in Christianity, basically all of the apostles were martyred, and then you had the intense persecution that followed in the Roman Empire, and the stories there, and it was always, these people willingly went and sacrificed their lives, and this was part of the reason why really the religion spread so rapidly, because they saw the truthfulness of what they believed in, that they were ready to lay their lives down and in this manner, and seek death. And similarly, in the Baha'i Faith, you have really horrific levels of violence that were directed against the Babis and later the Baha'is. If you read any of those accounts, they're really quite moving and resonate with exactly what was happening with the later with the Christian martyrs earlier. And there are many accounts of, for example, I know, and remembering a story of this Jewish individual who in Iranian society at the time, they were very, it's kind of almost caste-like, is that there was the Jewish community, they were separate. There was the Zoroastrian community was separate. There was the Muslim community, and they had their place, and they never would dream of converting, or there's no conversion going on between them to different religions. But in this instance, this individual witnessed one of the executions of the Baha'is, and a little spot of blood landed on his foot, and that just shook him up, and he wanted to know what was it that these people were dying for, and from that his whole family became Baha'i, and you have now descendants of these individuals who are spread all over the world. So Baha'i Faith, I think, like Christianity, view martyrdom as really this mechanism and this is the sacrifice of Christ as a way for regeneration, of the world in a way. So it is, so I think there's a lot of similarities there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question asks, what parallels can we draw between the writings of the apostles and the tablets and letters written by Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha?
That's an interesting question. There are some parallels. There's one, I think, important difference, though, that we should always bear in mind, is that one of the things that differentiates, I think, Christianity from the Baha'i Faith is this idea in the Baha'i Faith, which is expressed in this concept of the covenant. So in the Baha'i Faith, we basically have this understanding that the older revelations of God did not have a very firm lesser covenant, in that and when we mean by covenant, we're talking about this idea of succession. So, for example, one of the contentious issues that always arose in many of these religions was the idea that after the death of the prophet, who was going to succeed them and who would have authority to lead the community and to go on, and then what happens after that. And so you have, for example, in Christianity, famously, Christ says, upon this rock I build my church. And so I was on this basis of this statement that really you have the idea that Peter would lead the community. But then it's unclear what would happen after that. And part of that, was the seeds for the schisms that developed centuries later between the church, because you couldn't really point to any concrete. You'd had that statement, but then you could, it's hard to infer a lot from that. And he had similar problems in Islam, really from the get-go. But in the Baha'i Faith, Baha'u'llah made it very clear that he was going to avoid this. And he avoided this by being very explicit who had authority to interpret and to lead the community going into the future. So he made very clear that Abdu'l-Baha had the authority, absolute authority, to interpret and to explain the teachings of this revelation. And then after him, Shoghi Effendi, this is his grandson. And then the authority to run the community then fell to what is currently running the community, the Universal House of Justice. So there's a kind of there is an unbroken chain of authority, of transmission, which was by design intended. Now, this was not set up in the earlier revelations, and part of this we're taught is because humanity was just not at a level of maturity to be able to manage that we would have not been capable of keeping our unity. And so whatever, for example, we read in the commentaries of Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah, not Baha, but of Shoghi Effendi and all this, these letters, these we take with, I think, a higher degree of authority and context than maybe you can infer what existed, for example, the letters of Paul and going forward. Since we accept, I mean, there's obviously truth and correctness there, and they were guiding the community. I'm sure the Holy Spirit had a task for them, but there's still, you can always say that, well, maybe they were slightly confused on some point or not. There's always going to be that issue that's not. And now, of course, more Orthodox Christians will say, no, they're guided by the Spirit and not in error. But this is debatable, and this was part of the reason which caused problems. But I think there is a similarity that you had these letters which were guiding the community afterwards. Anyways.
Thank you. Another question asks, how do the roles of Jesus Christ and Baha'u'llah differ in the context of their respective dispensations, and how are they complementary?
Well, I think that there's one big difference. So, in Jesus's prayer, he says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So Christ basically disavowed that he was going to set up an order, a kingdom of God on earth during his age. He said this is something that's going to happen later in the future. And so he did not really, the institutions or how these things which were going to be set up, which actually Baha'u'llah then did, because he claimed that this is what we believe as Baha'is, that Baha'u'llah's revelation is the fulfillment of the prophecies of Jesus, the setting up of the kingdom. This is the kingdom of God on earth being established. And to that end, Baha'u'llah, contrary to Christ, set up actual and laid out the formulation for the institutions which would govern and guide the faith. This is part of what I was talking about earlier with the covenant. So he made clear how these institutions would run to help order the affairs of humanity. And so that's I think one of the big differences.
Thank you. Another question asks, how can studying early Christianity inform our understanding of the Baha'i Faith's development in its early stages?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating thing, and like I said before, I believe the Guardian was a student of this, looking at the Roman history and how it emerged, and I think maybe it can help us understand better of how the future. We cannot, none of us can predict, what the future holds and how this faith will grow and the different turns it will take. But I think a good paradigm or a good model is to actually look at early Christianity as it's evolving within the Roman Empire and understand both the pitfalls that were expressed, that, well, as soon as they, unfortunately, you kind of see this paradigm as soon as they achieved temporal power, that's when things kind of fell off the cliff. And also this divergence in focusing on the minutia of theological questions. So people were early Christian, not early, but later on Christians, they started really getting after each other over really what we now would look at and say, this is okay. you believe in this formula for the Trinity, and I believe in this slightly different formula. And now we're going to kill each other over this question. This is crazy. Baha'u'llah kind of does away with all of that on some level, because he basically says, you guys don't know. You know, this is this idea. He says explicitly, God is sanctified above all attributes and holy above all names. And and Shoghi Effendi comes along because, you know, religious truth is relative to the age. So you're never gonna, your human mind is finite. You're never gonna wrap your mind around all of these details. You're gonna get it wrong, and it's okay. That's not the, you know, the fact that you understand conceptually all these details is not what's going to get you into heaven. Is not the point of this exercise. You know, the point is faith, is spirit, and this is what's important. Whether you understand exactly, you know, who or how Baha'u'llah was, and this is not really such a massive deal. And I think that avoids maybe some of the pitfalls that you saw develop in early Christianity.
Thank you. Another similar question asks, what are there any lessons from the spread of early Christianity that could be applied to the growth of the Baha'i faith in today's world?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that I think if you read about the history of the spread of Christianity, one of the things which attracted the Romans to the Christianity was the absolute utter self-sacrifice and love and serving. Like when the plague would strike Rome and these cities, all the citizens were trying to get out of there as fast as they can and save their necks. Meanwhile, you know, some of these pagan commentators are saying, my God, these Christians are doing the opposite. They're rushing in, trying to serve their fellow man, trying to take care of them, setting up hospitals, trying to, you know, and risking their lives to take care of humanity. So I think the degree to which we Baha'is as a community can really show that level of self-sacrifice, serving humanity, is the degree to which, and Abdul Baha tells us this, you know, this is the degree to which we can be successful.
Thank you. One question asks, which book do you recommend the most for a Christian to learn about the Baha'i faith?
Gosh, there's a lot. I think if it's an introduction, probably the old standard is Baha'u'llah and the New Era is a great book. That's the book I think my mom, who was raised a Christian and later became Baha'i, read and taught her. But there are lots of other books. If you want to get more theologically, then there's of course you know, Baha'u'llah's Kitab-i-Iqan, but that's scripture and maybe more challenging to read. But yeah, I think Baha'u'llah in the New Era I would recommend.
Thank you. Another question asks, how does the concept of the return of Christ in Christianity relate to Baha'u'llah's claim to be the promised one?
So it is. I mean, we believe that Baha'u'llah is the return of Christ, that promise that was given. So it's exactly that. And there's a famous book that was written by William Sears many years ago called Thief in the Night, which actually lays out the case for how, if you look at the prophecies that were given in the Bible, that they correspond to the birth of the Baha'i faith, even so far actually as the date, 1844. So what's fascinating is that I didn't get into this, but while all this was going on in Persia and with the Bab and the Babi revelation, you had in the United States prior to this a similar type of expectation emerging, where people were very convinced that Jesus was going to appear. And this, the peak of this was this preacher by the name of Miller, who basically made this prophecy that in 1844, 1830, 1843, that Jesus Christ was going to come. And he had studied the Bible, and he based it on some verses, and he had a whole calculation that he came up with. And this, a lot of people went out on these days and waited for Christ to come out of the sky, and it didn't happen. So there was a, you know, so independent of any Baha'is claims or theological claims, you have these separate sects, separate things, which are looking at the Bible and saying, you know what, this is kind of looks like the time that we should be seeing Christ appearing. And on the other side of the globe, you know, he appears. So I think there's ample, just, you know, evidence there that there's a, you know, even if you don't want to get into the details, that there's something there, and some of it's pretty interesting. I mean, actually, if you just think about, well, this is one of the ideas that William Sears brings forth in the Thief in the Night. If you just look at what has happened to humanity, okay, so I think the argument can be made, very clearly compelling, that the 19th century, mid-19th century, saw the greatest event that human have ever experienced. If you look at any chart of human activity, population growth, industrial production, scientific output, any metric of human activity, even what's happening to our environment, you know, the destruction of the environment that's going on, everything is traceable to this inflection point that you see occurring in the middle of the 19th century. So something happened then, something big happened then. And so now your question is this: if you're a person of faith, you ask yourself, well, something of this magnitude, which you can argue, like I said, is the greatest event of human history. Nothing greater has happened to humanity since what happened then surely our religious books, if they have any worth, must have predicted this and must have foreseen this event happening. And so I need to look to my scripture, and I think there's evidence for it. So either you say that there is no evidence, which casts doubt on the veracity of your belief system, or you say it's there, and then you need to be looking, and then you need to be asking the question, well, where is this being fulfilled?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question asks, how did early Christians navigate the balance between faith and the Roman Empire? And what lessons can the Baha'i community draw from that in navigating modern secular societies?
Yeah, I think it was much more difficult for Christians, early Christians, than for us, frankly, because they would be killed if they weren't offering sacrifices to the emperor. So this I think was much more challenging in that respect for the early Christians. For Baha'is, I think that the challenge maybe is that we're not challenged to be called upon to make some type of such levels of sacrifice. It's more basically, I think, maintaining the level of morality, and in absence of these physical, because it's interesting, persecution is kind of the fuel that purges us and allows us to grow spiritually. You need to be challenged, and if you're not challenged, so this is the problem, is actually maybe not being challenged, that we need to grow spiritually to be examples like those early Christians were, of self-sacrifice, and not be seduced by the pleasures and comforts of the world.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question here from a Christian that asks,
Mhm.
we Baha'is believe that our prophet is the second coming of Jesus. If that is true, then how come he didn't overcome death like Jesus did?
Yeah, so it depends what you mean by death. Okay. So I would argue that if you look carefully and you read carefully, what is the meaning of the term death in the New Testament, you'll come away understanding that death is not physical death. Death has nothing to do with physical death. It's spiritual life and it's spiritual death. And this is what Jesus spoke of, in my opinion, my reading of the New Testament. If you read what Jesus is speaking of, he is always turning your attention to the real life and the real death, which is the spiritual life and the spiritual death. And so in my opinion, this is what Baha'u'llah is bringing. He is bringing the spiritual life to humanity. He is bringing this, and this is a life that will never be extinguished. We all are going to die, okay? This is a fact of life. So, and this is a fact of physics. This is just, we are composed of things and will be decomposed. But what won't be decomposed is the spirit. And what you mean by the spirit is that connection that you have with your God, you know, and what illuminates you and what gives you power and what animates the whole of this existence that we currently live in. I think all of us, if we sit calmly and we meditate and we reflect on our existence, we'll recognize that there is this power that exists, and this is this connection that we have to the divine and to God. And it is, I believe, if you open the writings of Baha'u'llah, just as when you open the writings of Jesus and read his words, that you'll find that water of life that will give you your spiritual life, that will revive you, and you'll recognize it. So I used to have a friend that, you know, kind of asked me, you know, how am I going to know that this is Bahá'í Faith is the truth, you know? And I said, I think the advice I was thinking is that it's like food. So what are these manifestations of God doing? In my opinion, they're bringing this water of life, this bread of life to us. And how do we know if this is correct bread or the false or not? Well, you eat it. You know, if you're not spiritually sustained by it, if you're not growing, if you're not becoming healthy from it, then that's not the true thing. If on the other hand, when you eat it, you feel better, you know. So I would advise you to open these words, read them with an open heart, and see if it touches your soul and see if it moves you. If it doesn't, then move on. If it does, you've found your Lord.
Thank you. So I think that's all of our questions for today. So I want to thank you again so much, Dr. Ranjbar, for your talk and all these really deep and nice follow-up questions. Thank you for joining us.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right. So our speaker next week is going to be Dr. Augusto Lopez Claras. And these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern Time. So please invite your friends and family. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, I will put the Google form again in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Have a great week. Bye.